Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now, this is an RX 570 8GB edition. For the past few months when I haven't been benchmarking other GPUs or CPUs, I've been using it in my system for all of my gaming and rendering needs, but I've kept pretty quiet about it. See, this card was probably the cheapest RX 570 I could find anywhere at the time of my purchase, but there is one big reason behind it. See, it seems the seller was being a little too honest for some people, explicitly stating that this had a pretty hard life as a mining GPU. It was in a rig with a few other RX 570s, and because the whole mining craze has somewhat died down, or so I'm told, I don't have a clue about mining, the seller was selling this off along with a few others very cheap. I thought, hey, why not buy it and see if its past life has badly affected its modern everyday performance. Now, there can be a lot of stigma around buying used components as it is, let alone ex-mining ones, so I thought, hey, why don't we pick this one up, see if it still runs fine, and talk about my experience with what I think was the cheapest RX 570 in the country, the 8GB model that is, at the time of my purchase. It also gives a chance to see how well this particular card holds up in 2018, providing it isn't absolutely busted. So let's get into it and talk about this GPU. So after paying just £70 British for this card here in the UK, I'm sure you can understand why I was a little sceptical, although the seller reassured me that this RX 570 was indeed in full working order, and so I had to take their word for it, knowing that I could probably ask for a refund if it arrived not working. At over half the price of the current RRP for one of these, I thought it was a pretty decent deal too. So of course the only way I could tell if it was a good deal or not was to perform a sort of long-term test, hence why I've been running it in my system for a few months. I didn't want to review this card and say, hey, look what you can find online, for it to break during testing, but rest assured that this one definitely seems to be in fully working order. That's not to say that every ex-mining card will of course be in the same condition. I'm just merely stating that you can find some decent deals by shopping around for some ex-mining GPUs. I think buying an ex-mining card also depends on whether or not the owner of it knew what they were actually doing with it. For example, someone who buys such a quantity of cards to put in a mining rig are going to want to ensure that they look after them. So it may be that a card like this has been actually given a better life than someone who would use it for gaming most of the day. There's also the fact that it may have been undervolted as well to improve or reduce, should I say, power draw. But again, it completely depends on who's had it and what it's been used for exactly. So the only definitive answer I could give you in terms of the question, should you buy an ex-mining card, is, well, it depends. But speaking from my usage of this one, well, it's still running fine. So, we've talked about buying a used mining card, but let's take a look at what the RX 570 8GB can actually do in 2018. It's only a year old, it only came out in April of 2017, but it's one of those cards that sort of sits between entry level and mid-range, so it'll be interesting to see just how well it can keep up. So let's get into some titles. As you may have already noticed, or hopefully anyway, GTA 5, a slightly older title out of the ones on today's list, runs absolutely fine here, averaging over 90 frames per second with the very high settings. Of course, GTA 5 I feel on PC still looks pretty good, and it's nice to see that it runs well on this card also. One game I was particularly eager to try out was Assassin's Creed Odyssey, because a lot of other reviewers mentioned when this game came out that it ran quite badly on a wide variety of cards. In fact, the performance was sort of all over the place, with certain RX cards performing the same as slightly cheaper Nvidia GPUs in the same sort of scenarios. The RX 570 here, with a mixture of the medium and high settings, averaged 37 FPS with a 1% low of 29 and a 0.1% low of 24. This means that you will get some dips below 30 FPS using these settings at 1080p, but don't worry, because Assassin's Creed Odyssey was by far the worst performing game of today, and it just so happens to be the newest. Of course, need I remind you that Ubisoft aren't exactly known for their fantastic optimization across their games, and hopefully as we see more updates for this one come out, performance will be improved. Overwatch at the ultra settings here with 100% resolution scaling at 1080p, averaged 125 FPS. Now the footage you see is from a bot match, but the figures were taken from a few different online game modes. Playing about 3 different games gave us these end results, and it was a pretty flawless experience throughout my time with Overwatch and the RX 570. Now of course I have been gaming on this quite a lot over the past few months, and I've also been stress testing it with benchmarks like Unigine's superposition, because that will push our GPU to its limits. But I will show you exactly what program that is a little later on. Rainbow Six Siege, a 2016 title, also ran very nicely indeed with the ultra settings at 1080p, averaging way over 100 FPS. Now I ran the benchmark result here, or the footage rather, is from the benchmark, but the benchmark figures were taken from a mixture of solo play during a terrorist hunt game and online play as well. This is just a general average that you'll be likely to see with this card and all of the latest driver updates for the GPU installed. Overall then, it was a very nice experience when playing Rainbow Six Siege. Now you may have noticed that the GPU is actually maxing out at 99 or 100% throughout most of today's tests, and it will do especially with a processor like the Ryzen 5 1600 as well as the i7 3770K, which I have also been testing recently. Other specs include 8GB of DDR4 memory here. Now with the Crew 2, an interesting thing to note about performance is that there will be a few frame dips here and there. Most of the time it will run at the capped 60 frames per second, no matter what you're doing, whether you're driving a boat around the water, riding a motorcycle around the city, or flying your plane between all of the buildings, things like that. But there is an annoying sort of hitching that occurs every few moments in the game where the frame rate will drop to 54-55 FPS. Now while these are still pretty decent frame rates, you'll definitely notice that slight drop, and it can be quite off-putting in some situations. This is of course the 8GB card as well, so I'm not sure how the 4GB card would differ when it comes to comparisons with this one. Next up I jumped into Call of Duty World War II with a mixture of the high and extra settings. As I usually mention, Call of Duty World War II here can go from looking absolutely fantastic at the upper end of the scale to absolutely diabolical when you turn the graphical settings right down to low. In this case, the game looked very nice with a mixture of the higher sort of settings at 1080p, and performance was also very respectable too. Now most of the gameplay you see here took place inside some of the bunkers where the frame rate will be generally higher, so the average is taken from the opening couple of levels. As you go outside, that frame rate will drop ever so slightly to around 80 frames per second, but like I say, the average overall is still a very nice one. You may even see a drop to the mid-50s in some instances, but the game picks up pretty quickly again, and you don't really notice or feel these stutters. Finally, I want to talk about the aforementioned Unigine superposition benchmark. Now, this benchmark is designed to push your hardware to the limits. Now, I've been running this test every day using this card just for stability purposes. Now, a few people were saying that mining cards, they may turn on, they may power up to Windows, but when you do anything remotely strenuous, the card may shut down, and that's when you may experience certain issues. Running this benchmark every day, though, proved that this GPU is certainly working very well indeed, and overall, I think we got a pretty good deal on this one. £70 British for a card that still retails for double that here in the UK. Really isn't a bad deal at all, but as I say, it totally depends on who you're buying an X-Mining GPU from, and you want to ask as many questions as you can. Also, if you are buying a card like this, then make sure the seller is pretty well rated if it's a site like eBay, and try and buy through somewhere like that where there's a money back guarantee as well, especially if the seller's saying it's good, it's working fine, and it turns up with you and it's an absolute dog. Overall though, we've put this thing through its paces over the past couple of months, the past few months, the past several weeks, and it's held up very nicely indeed. So, A bit of a risky purchase, but I hope you've enjoyed this video nonetheless. If you did, leave a like on it. Leave a dislike if you didn't. Let me know if you've ever purchased an X mining card and how well it worked out for you. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.